I tracked my income with it, and I wound up in, I think, a year and a half, I donated almost $20,000 to frontline causes. And I was like, that's really insane because I live in San Francisco and I'm a yoga teacher. How the hell did I do this?
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I hope you are having a great day so far. I am recording this intro from sunny, hot, and humid Moyobamba in Peru. I've been here since end of April teaching a yoga teacher training in this beautiful jungle. The teacher training is wrapping up. Couple more days left of my first teacher training here in this town. It's going well so far. It's been very eye-opening and beautiful to witness a group of strangers who come together to do a teacher training, becoming really close friends, and how open everyone has become, and how we really share our life and personal stories, personal experiences. A lot of intimate conversation that happens in a setting like this in a teacher training. It's also have been very fun and exciting to watch students practice evolve and their mind evolve, as well as their ability to pay attention to subtle things has become more and more sharpened over the days. So that's been kind of fun and exciting to witness and be part of facilitator and teacher for this experience for them. So it's been great so far. I'm learning a lot as I go, and I'm also learning to trust myself, trust my ability and my teaching skills. So great experience so far. There are a lot of mosquitoes and bugs and cockroaches, huge spiders, as well as snakes, and a lot of creatures around that I'm trying to get used to. It's been great so far. After this training is done, I do have a little bit of break, so I do plan to travel to different part of Peru. So maybe next intro you hear from me next week, I will be in another part of the country. I'll make sure to be sharing with all of you my updates of this journey. So today I have a special conversation to share with you. I have interviewed Diana. Diana and I have never met in person. I first found out about her when Annie Carpenter, which is my teacher, was promoting a workshop, a Smart Flow workshop, but Annie wasn't teaching. It was one of her students teaching it. And Diana was one of the main teachers for this workshop. The workshop was on nervous system and yoga. And I learned a lot from this online workshop. And ever since then, I've been following her on Instagram, talk and message each other on Instagram. And I just have a huge respect for her. She also has an online yoga studio that she's been teaching since the pandemic. And I just love the work that she offers in this world. And especially after having this conversation, I was so inspired by the passion and so much heart and kindness and compassion she has for the world and environment and different causes that she really believes in. So I hope you will be very inspired from this conversation. Diana is a full-time yoga teacher, environmental organizer, and soon-to-be somatic experiencing practitioner. Her approach to practice is infused with anatomy, playfulness, and somatic awareness. She believes that yoga is a way to observe both physical and psychological patterns, to understand tangibly cause and effect, to choose a new way forward if desired, and above all else, to be kind. Diana teaches public classes, workshops, and works one-on-one with individuals to offer support for their needs. She has worked with people with chronic and acute pain, injury, neurological disorders, mild to severe mental health issues, and simply people who wish to have accountability in their practice. She loves slow mornings, spending time with her 2 kitties, riding bikes, and more recently motorcycles, and every tree on the planet. Here is the interview I had with Diana. I will speak to you on the other side. welcome Diana for coming to join me on the Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so happy that we get to have this conversation today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Reika, I've been so excited to talk to you, and I've known you from afar for a long time. So it's really great to connect more one-on-one.
Yes, me too. So maybe tell the listener, where are you logging in from today?
So I am logging in from Detroit, Michigan, which is where I grew up, just north of Detroit. And I lived in Chicago, where I started teaching for about 6 years. I moved to San Francisco and taught there for about 7 years. And I moved home to Detroit in the pandemic, where I turned everything online.
Ah, I see. So my mom lives in Michigan. She lives in Coldwater. Do you know?
I have no idea where that is.
Very small town. I feel like it's such a small town, and every time I visit, it's such a hassle to get there because there's no airport, like a big main airport nearby. So either I fly into Chicago or Detroit, and it's a quite a long drive to get to her place. It's beautiful. It's a small town, and there's a lot of, when I went there in the summertime, it's very green, flat but green. Not many, a lot of hills or mountains there, but winter too was really nice to experience the snow when I went. So I do, when I do get to enjoy, I get to enjoy the small town vibe.
Yeah. Yeah. Michigan is really gorgeous, and there's so much water here. So that was a very stark difference from being in Northern California with incessant drought happening in the Bay Area and all of California. So moving back here, everything is green and lush, and it rains, and there's so many lakes and rivers and creeks. And yeah, it's really beautiful here.
Yeah. So you said that you first became a yoga teacher in Chicago?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell us about what brought you to yoga in the beginning.
Yeah. So I started practicing yoga in Michigan, and I was introduced to yoga from my oldest sister, who she knew I was having a very tough time. So I went away to college and had no way to manage stress. And so I wound up, my body really broke down in college due to stress and anxiety. And I grew up an artist, not an athlete. And so I really didn't know how important it was to keep my body healthy. So when I got really sick and my body broke down, my sister thought that yoga would help. So she introduced me to my first yoga class, and it really helped everything in my life at that point. And so I started to practice a lot, and I went to Chicago to go to graduate school. And when I was taking my graduate school program, I also took my yoga teacher training program because I used yoga to help deal with the stress of graduate school. And I just fell in love with the practice, and the studio I was at thought I would be a good fit for their teacher training program. And even though I resisted teaching, I thought, well, if I'm resisting it so much, maybe I should do it and see why I'm resisting it so much. And as soon as I took the teacher training, I was like, well, I'm going to teach.
What was your master's program or your graduate program?
Yeah, so I'm trained in, it's a master of urban planning and public policy with a focus in community development. And I did my undergraduate in environmental studies and environmental economic policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I really had a big passion for actually food and bringing healthy food to communities. I was always that person who I was a true environmentalist in undergrad, and I wanted to help with air quality and water pollution and soil degradation and human rights violations. And so I realized that our food system really intersected with all the things I cared about. So I studied food systems. And then when I went to graduate school, I really looked at urban planning and how do people get access to food, where are food deserts, that kind of thing. And I also taught yoga.
Wow. And when you said you were artist first, when you were living in Detroit, what kind of artist were you?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm a musician, so I grew up playing piano, and I was in a a punk band in my high school. So I played bass guitar in a punk band, and I just always loved music, playing music. And so that was my main art form. Even throughout college and graduate school, I was playing music with people.
Mhm.
But I also consider teaching yoga an art. And I really found that moving my body and creating ways to move body is an art form as well. So I do consider teaching yoga to be an art form.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think that's so beautiful. So, when you first took your teacher training in Chicago, tell me about your 200-hour program. What kind of format was it? What kind of training? Was it a specific focus? And did you enjoy it?
Yeah. So this usually is surprising for people to hear because I teach very differently now, but my first 200 hour was I was trained at Core Power Yoga, which is a heated power vinyasa studio with a set sequence. And I actually did love my training. The teacher who led my training, her name was Sherry Colosimo, is just an incredible human, an incredible teacher, and I had some wonderful mentors there. So I feel like I got a great training. And while I do feel like looking back, it lacked some of the depth in the yogic philosophy that I really wanted to learn about, I did learn how to teach a class. So they're really good at like how to cue and how to get through a sequence and how to time things. So I really got a strong foundation of getting through a public class. Um, so I did enjoy the teacher training, and I taught there for 8 years and um, got a lot of great experience. So,
And how long was your teacher training?
well, I think it was a 200 hour and it went by fast. It might have been a 2 month program. So we met, I forget how often we met at this point. It was so long ago,
Yeah.
but it went by fast. I
Uh-huh.
did it in one summer. Yeah.
Okay. So you said they taught you set sequence. Is that the only sequence you were allowed or able to teach at the Core Power Studio later? Or do you have to take a different trainings to be able to teach different sequences?
Yeah. So once I graduated from the training, so I learned it's called the C1 sequence or their level one sequence. And that's all I was allowed to teach for a certain amount of time. And then you would have to audition into teaching other styles of classes. They call it level two, where the teacher gets permission to create their own sequences. Um, I forget exactly how it works again because it was so long ago, but eventually I had to test in to be able to create my own sequences and teach from there. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just interviewed somebody who also did a Core Power teacher training, and she went on to become a yoga therapist and also OT later in her life, which I
Mhm.
think is pretty amazing. So I know quite a lot of people who went through Core Power training, and I hear great things, and community is what I keep hearing people say how great the community was. But she brought up a really good point that in the beginning she was only teaching the set sequence, but that gave her such a great experience in the first few years when she was a newer teacher to be able to learn how to teach in front of people and learn how to maybe like watch students and see bodies without having to have to think about coming up with new sequence every single class or every single week. So it really gave her the first year of her teaching that set sequence really gave her a lot of other teaching skills that was necessary to be able to teach, very confidently in front of a group of people without having to think about this, bringing in the whole sequencing equation into the math.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's a lot of benefit to teaching a set sequence. I find that when I talk to other newer yoga teachers, one of the biggest stressors is how to keep creating inspiring sequences. And I tell people over and over, your students don't care how creative your sequence is. They will feel better if you have the confidence to teach something, even if it's over and over. People love repetition. People learn by repetition, and you can teach one sequence with 5 different ways and have 5 different feelings in the class. So there
Yeah.
can be a lot of ways to be creative in your teaching without having the postures change so much.
Yeah, that's such a good point. So you finished your teacher training, and did you get a teaching position right away at Core Power after your training?
Yeah, so it was such an interesting time. So one of the teachers who I loved at Core Power, she opened up her own yoga studio in Chicago called Vessel Yoga. The teacher is Margot Callison Lightburn, and she was one of my favorite teachers. And she just opened up her own studio when I graduated teacher training. And when she opened up her studio, she also got pregnant at that time. And so I asked her if she needed any help with her yoga studio since she was pregnant. And she was like, absolutely, I need help. So she really took me under her wing and mentored me throughout her pregnancy. And when she went on maternity leave, I took over her yoga studio and taught all the classes. So I did get a job right away, a pretty unique mentorship that is rare, I think, these days to get. And I also got a job at Core Power. So yeah, I had wonderful experience right off the bat and taught, in retrospect, I couldn't do that again. I was teaching like 19 classes a week and but I had the energy. I was young. I had the energy and the enthusiasm. I thought it was awesome.
Yeah.
Now is a completely different story, but
Yeah.
I'm glad I did it.
So yeah, I was going to ask how many classes you were teaching during that time. So 19 classes, that's quite a bit. And at the same time, you were also completing your graduate school.
Yes.
Right. So that
You
was,
can see where my priorities were.
so that was kind of your job during your your graduate school to kind of help you with your living expenses. It was yoga teaching and school.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe tell us after you finished, you graduated from your school, what happened next?
Yeah, I mean, after I finished my master's degree, I just found that I had more time to teach yoga. I was making what I considered pretty good money at the time, having, been a poor college student beforehand and, had a lot of loans out and that sort of thing. So any entry level job that I could have gotten in my field, one, didn't make that much money, and two, wasn't as exciting to me as teaching yoga. So I wound up just teaching more yoga and sticking with that. And I am a doer and I had a passion for yoga, and I just started teaching more workshops and I started teaching retreats like very early on. I just felt like the sky was my limit. Everything felt so organic and natural for me as a yoga teacher. I just kept with it.
So you kept on teaching after you graduated, and you pretty much were a full-time teacher right after your,
Yeah. So I've never had a job outside of yoga. I mean, unless you count high school jobs like working retail or at fast food restaurants, which I've had those jobs, but I've never had a job outside of teaching yoga. This is my only career.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. So when you were teaching yoga, you started leading retreats and you were doing workshops. How many classes you said 19 classes during the time of your graduate school, but that time period you were teaching full time in Chicago, what was maybe the most number of classes you were teaching?
But 19, that was the max. And I kept it up for a while. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, I don't really recall it ever getting more than 19 because that was no matter, even though I was young and very full of energy, that would wipe me out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And were you teaching at more than two studios, Core Power and the other studio that you were working at? Or were you kind of, I feel like in LA, teachers have to work at so many studios and like drive to different studios to kind of make it work as a full-time teacher. It was that the thing in Chicago as well?
Yeah, so I taught mostly at Vessel and at Core Power, and then a small studio in my neighborhood called Tula Yoga opened, which was in Logan Square neighborhood in Chicago. So I taught there, which I loved working at a cute neighborhood studio. And then I actually worked the front desk at another studio called Yoga View because I wanted to practice at a studio that I did not teach at because I found that if I practiced at studios I taught at, it was a different vibe than teaching at a studio I didn't teach at. So I liked having a little more anonymity in to practice than where I was teaching. So
Yeah. I can see that because you always end up seeing your students and your coworkers, and it just doesn't feel like you're in. It's harder to get in your practice when you're practicing at a places you work at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. And I know you said you eventually moved to San Francisco. So how did that move happen, and what prompted that move?
Yeah. Well, my oldest sister lived out in the Bay Area, so I was always visiting. That's actually where I met Annie Carpenter. She was teaching at a yoga journal conference, the free community class, which is where I met Annie. And I would always visit San Francisco, and I loved it out there. I thought the yoga was so wonderful out there, and I thought I should move there. So I moved there with the intention of teaching yoga and being at a mecca of yoga. So I secured a job at a place called the Yoga Loft, which was an Iyengar yoga studio at the time. It was an Iyengar studio for 25 years, and they were under new ownership and wanted to sort of expand their offerings from Iyengar to more alignment-based vinyasa. So they hired me as a lead teacher and to be part of their teacher training faculty, and I moved out there to take that job. But 2 months after I moved there, that studio burnt down. So there was a fire and the studio ceased to exist. So, um,
Oh no.
yeah, so me losing my job is not the main issue of that fire. But for me personally, I was like, what do I do now? Because that was my main income. But I had been there for 2 months, and through, you know, how the yoga community is, it's everyone is so friendly and so supportive. So a student who had taken my class at the Yoga Loft thought about me when the studio burned down and got me a job at Yoga Tree. So I got hired at Yoga Tree, and I also got a job at a small studio called Ocean Beach Yoga, which was the neighborhood I lived in was Ocean Beach. And so I just kept teaching from there. And, you know, it was a rough start to teach in a new space and have the studio burnt down. But in yoga, I learned to just trust that things happen for a reason, even if they're really hard and awful, and just to keep trying to put one step in front of the other.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm curious, how long were you teaching as a full-time in Chicago before you made the move to the Bay Area?
so I was teaching in Chicago for about 6 years
Mhm.
before I moved to San Francisco. So I was still pretty new teacher at the time, but I didn't feel quite like a beginner, but I didn't feel quite like
Mhm.
uh, I've been teaching for that long. So it was a good time for me to, if I wanted to spread my wings, it felt cool to do it in a new spot. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And you said you were able to secure that job as a main teacher before you made the move?
Yeah. Yep. So I spent a couple months visiting San Francisco every few weeks, and I would just go to different studios and practice and check out other studios and try to meet the staff and meet studio owners. So I really did some on the foot work before I moved there.
And then you said that they were looking for more alignment based teacher and they found you and they thought you were the right fit. So at the time, your teaching style, how has it evolved from the, first coming out of 200 to that point where you said, a more alignment based teacher?
Yeah, well, really, I started to learn pretty quickly after teaching at Core Power that my skill level was not where I wanted it to be. There were a few instances where students came in and I didn't know how to support them. And so I'll just share this story. I was working at Core Power, you work at the front desk and check people in. And I was teaching my level 1 class, and I was a few months new, like I had been teaching for a few months. So I was very green, very new. And I was working at the desk, and these two elderly ladies walked in the door. And my initial thought was, I don't think they are going to be okay taking the level 1 class here. Like they looked like their posture wasn't good. They didn't look like they were in shape just based on how they were walking. But I'm also young and want to respect my elders and taking the beginner class and they are so excited to try yoga. So I did what I was trained to do and what I thought was the right thing, which is say, you're welcome here, just listen to your body. And during that class, during the warm up sequence, one of the ladies fell and she really injured herself. And I froze and I didn't know exactly how to handle it. And I just knew that I never wanted that to happen in my class again. So I put the class in child's pose. I got help. I assisted the lady out of the room and she was wound up to be fine. She had like a bloody nose and popped her knee replacement out. But she wound up being, I know it was awful. But she had a good attitude. She got help. She was fine. But that was a moment for me where I really knew that I needed to continue learning sequencing, continue learning alignment, continue learning skills to support anybody who walks in the room. So I continued my training right away. I wound up taking Anusara training and I wound up training with Annie Carpenter and a ton of workshops here and there. So I've always been inspired to continue to learn. And that was definitely a pivot moment for me. Like the first person injured in my class, I was like, no, I never want that to happen again.
It's kind of scary to have that happen. And, yesterday I was just on I had a conversation with one of my mentee and she asked the same question. She's like, I am so afraid of somebody getting hurt in my class. Like how, has that ever happened to you? And I think it's I'm so glad you shared that story because I think longer we teach, it's gonna inevitably happen. Sometime completely out of our control. Sometime maybe, who knows? We could have done something, but I don't know. But I think it's something that sometimes it's out of our control. It happens in our class. So I think it's good that you share that.
Yeah, I always try to share that story as a learning lesson to other teachers. Like one, to always truly listen to your intuition and do a lot of nervous system work to be able to voice in those moments and even go against the grain. Because I did like as soon as I saw her, I knew maybe the class would be too much, but I was afraid to upset her. I was afraid that the studio manager would get mad at me, like which are all my fears and insecurities. So I always try to tell teachers, like, listen to your intuition. Even if you make somebody upset, it's okay. Like your job is not to make everyone happy. And even if we try to make everyone happy, it's just impossible. So just do what you're comfortable with. And then, I did do a lot of extra training, but I still can't guarantee zero injuries. I can do what I can. I can sequence in the best way possible. I can offer modifications. But ultimately, I'm not in anyone's body and things happen. So,
yeah,
we do our best.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. We can do our best to sequence in a way that's safe. We can do our best to have continuing education and learn. And we can tell our students to listen to their body and all these things, but sometimes it'll still happen. Sometimes it's completely out of our control. So I'm glad you shared that. Definitely, I have stories of somebody getting hurt in my class as well. I didn't even find out that she got hurt until 3 months later. She came back to my class and told me that she hurt her back in my class. And I felt like, oh my God, I felt really bad. And I asked her, like, what did we do in that class? What pose was it? And all the things. But yeah, we just have to like live and learn from it.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully we can learn every time and including compassion for ourselves. Because I know I've hurt myself in yoga and I don't blame the yoga teacher. I don't blame myself. Like sometimes I just hurt myself. It just happens.
Yeah, definitely. There's always going to be, I guess, some amount of risk with any movement practice that we put ourselves into.
Yeah. And there's always a risk when you don't move too, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I want to know, you said you trained with Annie Carpenter, and that's how we know each other is because you've been Annie's students for a while, and you also taught Smart Flow workshop on nervous system before that I took, which was amazing. Did you take Annie Carpenter's training while you still lived in Chicago, or did that happen after you moved to San Francisco?
Yeah, I trained with her while I lived in Chicago. So, like I said, the first time I met her, I was visiting San Francisco because my sister lived out there
Mhm.
and she was teaching the free community class at a Yoga Journal conference back when Yoga Journal was headquartered in San Francisco.
Mhm.
So I met her there and she completely blew my mind in her workshop. And I was like, I need to train with this lady. So she visited Chicago and I took her workshops there. And then she was living in LA at the time. And so I flew to LA to train with her there. When I moved to San Francisco, she did not live there yet. So it was such a blessing when she moved to San Francisco when I lived there. And
Yeah.
I did rearrange my entire yoga schedule so I could take her classes, but then she changed her schedule. So then I changed mine and then she changed hers again. And I was like, Annie, I can't keep changing my schedule to take your class. So I just had to let it go.
Yeah. Oh my God, I can relate. I remember I was taking Annie's class during the pandemic, Monday, Wednesday, Saturday. She teaches at Nest. And when the pandemic was, I don't know if it was ending, but it was the studios were starting to open up and start offering classes. I made my teaching schedules around Annie's class because I'm like, I'm not missing Annie's class. I want to make sure this is my non-negotiable. So I can relate. So I want to hear a little bit more about moving from Chicago to San Francisco because moving it's been on my mind. I don't have any like short-term like goal or, a plan yet, but moving has been on my mind. I don't think I'll live in Los Angeles, Long Beach forever for the rest of my life. But also I have this little bit of like fear of like as a yoga teacher, if I move somewhere, I'm not going to have any student base. Nobody's going to know me there. I might have to start from zero. I'll make new teachers pay rate in the beginning, possibly. I don't know. So all this little, what if, what if, what if. So can you tell us how you moved past that and how was it to actually move across the country and start, not all over because you already had 6 years of teaching experience, but how was that like to move as a yoga teacher to new city?
Yeah, it was much more challenging than I thought. I am a quite determined and passionate person, so I keep going even when things get very challenging for me, but it was hard and much harder than I thought. I in When I left Chicago, everybody was surprised. I've had, a really popular like I was a very popular yoga teacher. I really felt at the top of my game in Chicago. And I, when I moved to San Francisco, no one knew me and no one trusted me. And I had to build that from scratch. So my classes went from 50 people in a class to 3 people in a class. And not all 3 people thanked me after the class. So it took a little bit of soul searching where I was faced with the question of, am I teaching yoga because people like me and it's popular and I got a lot of external gratitude from students, or am I teaching yoga because I believe in yoga? And so, because I wasn't getting I got paid pennies when I moved to San Francisco. I wound up selling most of my possessions just to pay rent in San Francisco because I wasn't making enough money to pay my rent. So I also took a job at a restaurant, which I quit after 2 months because I'm like, this is why people need yoga because teaching at a restaurant or like working at a restaurant is so awful. Um, so I really was like, should I keep teaching yoga because I'm making zero money? Not a lot of people are taking my classes. So I did some soul searching and realized I'm not teaching for all the gratitude that I get. I'm teaching because I really ultimately believe in this practice. It's transformed my life. I know it transforms people's lives. I believe in it so much. And so I'm just going to keep doing it. And if I only get 3 people in a class and they don't tell me thank you, I'm just going to trust that I'm impacting them somehow. And the teachings are getting out there. So I kept at it, and in time, I did build a really amazing community in San Francisco, and I keep in touch with so many of my San Francisco community. It took a while to build it back up. And it took a lot of energy and a lot of hustling. And I will say, when I moved from San Francisco back home to Detroit, I get this question a lot of like, are you going to teach in person here? And I have not ventured into the in-person teaching here because I know what it's like to start building a yoga community from scratch. And I don't think I have that energy in me at this point in my life. So I just teach online now, and I've built up my online yoga studio. And I know that wherever I move, I can take my yoga community with me. So I've really found joy in building an online studio where it's not dependent on where I live. Yeah.
How long do you think, I actually want to ask more about your online studio, but before that, how long do you think it took for you after moving to San Francisco to feel like you have built up, enough, following, student base, community, able to not make enough income from teaching yoga?
Yeah, so that's such a good question. And I never exactly thought of that, but I would say 2 years. And like I mentioned, I sold a lot of my possessions, including my electric piano, which I thought I would never part with because that's my music, that's my artwork. But I was like, piano or rent? Like, what am I going to do? So I sold my piano. And at the time, so this is like the serendipitous thing when I sold the piano. I sold it for $600, which was a steal, but I was like, that's just the amount I need to cover my rent. So I sold it. I know almost nobody in San Francisco, but the woman who picked up my keyboard, who bought it off Craigslist, was one of the very few students who's actually taken my class, my yoga class. And I didn't know this because I didn't know her name or anything like that. But the woman who picked up my piano was a yoga student. And I was like, wow, this is a sign to me that I need to keep teaching. So it was rough for a while. I took a second job at a restaurant, but then Core Power opened up in San Francisco. So they had not been there before. So I was able to negotiate a good salary essentially from them to come on as a senior teacher at Core Power in San Francisco. So I was able to get a higher paying, consistent job through Core Power. And so that really helped me. And that allowed me to teach again until I built up at other studios. And that whole process took about 2 years.
Okay. Were you living with other people? Did you have roommates and people you're sharing with?
Yeah. Yep, I did. So I don't know many people who can afford to live on their own in San Francisco. Lawyers and doctors have roommates out there.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
I mean, I'm sure there are people, but in my world, everybody has roommates.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Whenever I interview teachers in LA, we always talk about how difficult it is to have your own even apartment here in LA with a yoga teaching income. A lot of us either have partners or roommates, friends, family.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's amazing that Core Power opened up in a way that you already had experience teaching there, and you can negotiate a higher salary, and you got to teach quite a bit there. I would imagine many.
I didn't teach too much there because I didn't want to teach at Core Power at that point. Like I felt like I don't like hot yoga anymore. And the way I teach doesn't fit their brand as much anymore. So it was a bit of a compromise on my part, but it was a necessary compromise to keep teaching yoga. So, so I didn't teach there too much. I taught, I think, 3 classes there and helped out with their training.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And when you moved from Chicago to San Francisco area, did you have to lower your pay rate? Like maybe you were making this much per class in Chicago, but when you moved to a new city, nobody knows you. So even if you asked for more, did you have to kind of start with a lower rate?
Yeah. Well, actually, the pay is better in San Francisco than it was in Chicago. So every studio does it a bit different, but when I moved, like the per head count I was getting in Chicago was less than I got in San Francisco. It still wasn't great. Neither were great, but I did make more per person in San Francisco than I did in Chicago. I just had far less people. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so in Chicago and San Francisco, it was mostly per head pay structure. It wasn't per class.
Um, Core power was per class,
Mhm.
and everywhere else was a small base pay plus a per head count. Yeah.
I see. In LA, and then I haven't taught all over LA. I mostly just teach in Long Beach, but we just get per class rate. And
Yeah.
I know some bigger studios in LA do like there's a base pay and then you get per head beyond maybe that if you get more than 40 people, you get per head beyond 40. So I've seen that kind of structure, but mostly I'm seeing per class here. And but it seems like in the Chicago as well as San Francisco, there was more per head structure, which I think is nice because it gives opportunity to be able to make more as a teacher.
Yeah. It certainly can. And each studio has their own policies. I worked at a studio that offered a per head count, but then capped your pay. You couldn't make more than a certain amount, which I thought was real crummy.
Yeah. And how did your family and friends react to you choosing to pursue yoga as your main job, even after your graduate school? Were they supportive or were they kind of questioning you or hesitant?
Yeah, I think my mom it took her a while to understand that this was my career. She was always very supportive of yoga simply because it helped me with my mental health so much. So she always, like, she believes in yoga because she saw it help me so much and my other sister, Julie, so much. But then when I graduated my master's program and kept teaching yoga, there was always, like, for several years, there was like, so what are you going to apply for jobs? And I was like, Mom, I have a job. So there was a little bit of that, but after a while, she kind of got it that this is my career. And
Yeah.
sometimes people will give me job postings that they think I would be interested in, and they are very interesting type jobs. But I'm like, well, I just am a yoga teacher, so I'm not going to pursue other jobs. I've spent a long time, like, I do a lot outside of the yoga world, and I've done a lot of activist work and community organizing work and social justice work that I'm able to do. And I've considered going to a paid position for some of those type things, but I always felt like yoga is my career, and then it gives me space in my life to do other things that I love to do as well. So I think I'll always teach yoga. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you were in the Bay Area or the San Francisco when the pandemic happened, so before the pandemic, what was your teaching schedule like? How many classes were you teaching? Was there a lot of private? Was there group classes, corporate? I know you said you were doing retreats earlier.
Yeah. So at that point, I was doing a lot of retreats. I had also started a nonprofit called Global Movement Network, where I like to intersect between environmental justice, and I will always be a yoga teacher. So I did a lot of my retreats were donation based, and any profit I made would be donated to frontline direct action activists for environmental causes. So I did do a lot of retreats, but I didn't make any personal money off them, which really opened up a radical way of thinking around, why am I doing retreats? What are they for? What are their purpose? I found I could be a lot more generous with retreats because I wasn't trying to make money off of them. So I was doing at least 4 retreats a year, maybe more, donating all that money to causes I believed in.
Oh.
So I did that. And then I had a handful of private clients, and then I had where I did keep that money because I needed to pay my rent. um, and I taught, maybe I had about 9 classes, 7 to 9 classes, public classes.
That's amazing. I never heard of anybody running a retreat that was donation based and you donated all the profits. And you you use the money for the running of the retreats, right? Like maybe the food or renting the space, blah, but any profit beyond that you donated. And it was a completely donation based, like did the participant get to choose the price they pay?
Yeah, so I had to try out different models to see what worked. And I will preface that a handful of the retreats were I did have to pay for the space rental and the chef and that sort of thing. But a lot of the retreats I wound up doing were minimalist backpacking retreats. So there wasn't any overhead cost because we were camping. So there wasn't a house rental and people brought their own food. So it was a lot of like wilderness minimalist backpacking where I would do yoga and meditation on the trips. So, and those I wound up doing sliding scale donation because I found that if people didn't pay anything, they might not come on the retreat when the time came. And so I found that sliding scale, like it was 100 to $500 for the weekend. And you could rent gear, you could, like, there was some workshops on how to prep for the trip and what the gear was and all that kind of stuff. But the actual trip didn't have any overhead costs. So all that money went to frontline activists. Yeah.
Wow, that sounds amazing that you're leading a yoga retreat that was a backpacking retreat. And that sounds so fun. And so
it was great.
Yeah. So were you every day hiking, sort of backpacking certain miles, or were you kind of like go to one spot, kind of like stay there and then hike back?
Yeah, so I worked with a wilderness guide who was on the exact same page as me as far as what they wanted to do with the money. So yeah, we did a lot in Big Sur, or we would go to Emigrant Wilderness or Yosemite, and we would go usually off, like we wouldn't stay on the trails. We would go in the backcountry and go off trail and stuff. So.
And you would teach yoga like in the morning or after the hiking, or how did you weave in yoga there?
Yeah, usually we would stop on the hike somewhere beautiful and maybe do some stretching or a guided meditation or some breath work. And usually when we would get to the campsite at night, just a little stretch. It wasn't much, and it's much different out there. There's not flat surfaces or yoga props or anything like that. So we just, did some stretching and a lot of meditation out there. So.
Wow, amazing that you did that. And you said you created your own nonprofit for this retreat and donation work that you were doing?
Yeah. So I found that I think I tracked my income with it. And I wound up in, I think, a year and a half, I donated almost $20,000 to frontline causes. And I was like, that's really insane because I live in San Francisco and I'm a yoga teacher. How the hell did I do this? And so that really was one of many moments where I was like, I want to be able to expand this and include other teachers where maybe they're not going to do like 5 retreats for free per year, but maybe they would do a class or a workshop. So I had a group of people. We did a lot of vision boarding and planning together, and we created is essentially like a decentralized funding source where you could be part of the Global Movement Network and donate one class a week or one event, and it would all the money would go to a pool, and that money would go to we were supporting 2 causes. One was the Carrizo Comecrudo, the indigenous people down at the Texas-Mexico border who were fighting the wall. So I spent some time down there with that tribe and sat with them for a week and got to know them, and so we would just send money to them and for their fight for justice. And then the other one was friends of another friend who was in the network, and they were the Loué La Vie camp, which they were an indigenous group fighting a pipeline down in Louisiana. So every month, whatever events were held in the Global Movement Network, we would split it between those 2 causes. And they had some consistent funding for a few years until the pandemic when events ceased to exist. So we sort of dismantled when the pandemic happened, but it was great while it lasted.
Yeah, so amazing that you kind of like spearheaded this starting this retreat and nonprofit, getting teachers together, working with the wilderness.
Yeah, Wilderness Guide.
Wilderness Guide. So amazing. I love that. And I haven't heard anybody else do something like that. So I think that's so amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I look back and I'm like, wow, I was so fierce. I don't feel that fierce anymore, but I know it's in me because I look back, I'm like, wow, that was pretty freaking cool.
Yeah. And even, the fact that you chose to, do this retreat without you getting paid for it and donating all the money. And even like living in San Francisco is a very expensive place. So like you already shared how sometimes challenging it was financially to be able to live there and afford rent. And for you to still kind of create this nonprofit organization to continue to donate and give, I think that's so amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I always felt that when I felt the most rich was when I was out in nature. Like that's when I was like, oh, it doesn't matter how much money I have or anything like that. Like when I'm out in that expansive nature, I feel so filled up that I really, it reminds me of what I need, which is like we're born on a planet that gives us everything we need. And of course, I have lots of levels of like I'm in a very good position in this world. So I understand that I'm very, very fortunate and not everyone is fortunate like I am. So, but those moments of like, wow, I do have everything I need. And I want that to be my guide and not the, what can happen, especially when you're a broke yoga teacher, like trying to pay rent and the hustle and the bustle. And like it can get a little negative in that space and for good reason. But like when I let that energy motivate what I do, I wind up hurting more or feeling worse. But if I let what gives me life, when I let that guide my actions more, I usually live better somehow. So
I love that. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. So amazing. With my online studio as well, I made a commitment to every month donate 5% of my profit to a nonprofit that we have relationship with. And I do remember getting some business advice from some of the, business mentors out there that, are you sure you want to be donating right now? You're not making a lot from this online studio. Maybe you should just like wait till you start making more money and then choose to donate a bigger amount to a nonprofit. But that's something I just, for me, I want, that's kind of like a big driving factor for my businesses to always have some kind of giving back aspect. I don't want it to be just money, money, money and profit, profit. I want there should be some kind of circulation of wealth or money into different places in the world. So I really resonate with the work that you did and also sounds amazing. I also think about running a retreat and I've done a retreat once in the past with my yoga teacher friend, but I have a vision of running a retreat in the future that I want it to be very community based. I don't want to just go to a beautiful place and, do yoga and have a pool view. I want the retreat to have aspects of learning about the culture that we're visiting, learning about the people who live there, learning about the land and the herbs and, the natural herbal medicine that people in this indigenous community have been using for many years. And I don't want to just go there to take. I want to go there to learn, to also in the way that is beneficial and sustainable, giving back. I don't want to just take from the culture and the community I visit. I want it to be some kind of like cultural exchange. And I want to go there to like respect them and honor them and learn from them. And then also some kind of, again, like I want some kind of percentage of the profit to go towards local grassroots organization doing something amazing in that whatever location that I decide to do it at. So with all that said, it's so hard it takes so much longer to prepare and think and organize a retreat like that. So it hasn't happened yet, but it definitely is on my mind.
yeah, well, I fully support that. It sounds absolutely amazing. So
Yeah. Well, it's very inspiring that, hearing your stories of your retreats that you have done. So thank you for sharing that. That's such an amazing story. And I hope listeners who's listening can be very inspired by what you did.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a lot. And when I moved home, I did have to I didn't have to, I chose to take a step back and really slow down my life and not do as much like activism and even as much teaching. And I really just took a step back. I think the pandemic changed a lot of us, or, shook a lot of us up for better, for worse. Usually a combination.
Mhm.
And yeah, I really, now I can look back in retrospect. I'm like, oh, I was definitely burning myself out and I didn't know it at the time because I'm so passionate and because I was doing things so radically and doing things that I cared about so much that I didn't even realize I was getting burnt out. But now in retrospect, after really slowing my life down, I'm like, yeah, I was
Mm.
burning myself at both ends. And my life is a lot slower pace now. And that has been really helpful for me. And, I bought a house and I have an actual home that I live in now. And my partner is really wonderful. And I'm just, I'm just now getting energy back to fight for causes that I believe in again. So, for me, it's like the passion never left, my deep care never left, but I really had to spend a couple of years rebuilding my resources. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's talk about the pandemic because that was my next question. How did it impact your life, your yoga teaching life? And it seems like you have moved again across country again. Your teaching has changed from in person to online. So can you tell us about how the pandemic has affected you as a yoga teacher?
Yeah. Well, both of the studios I taught at in San Francisco closed down. And also when the pandemic happened, I went into full organizing mode. So I did a lot of mutual aid support for houseless communities at that time. And so I wound up choosing to move because my housing got unstable during the beginning stages of the pandemic because I was on the front line doing a lot of community organizing and resource distribution, which was really needed at the time. But the roommate I had, she wanted strict isolation and quarantine. So we couldn't both of us had to give up something too important to ourselves to live together. So we chose to keep our friendship, which we are still very good friends to this day. But to keep our friendship, I had to move. So I moved into temporary housing. I wound up moving 6 times from different temporary housing places. And I just wound up moving home to Detroit because I was like, I don't know where I'm going to live next in San Francisco. So I moved home to Detroit and I moved in with my sister, and it was medicine to me. The vibe in Detroit is it felt way more grounded than in San Francisco. And it's also where I grew up and I had family here. So I wound up, I was teaching online. My studio's closed. I was able to keep teaching online and be at home. And so I just decided to stay here and keep teaching online. And I know a lot of people wound up going back in person to teach and to practice, but I found that there was so many people who preferred to practice at home. They felt safer. They didn't have to navigate traffic or parking. They didn't have to navigate other people's energy. They really got to tap into how their bodies were feeling and only doing what they wanted and not having that social pressure of everybody else is staying in Warrior 2. So I'm going to stay in Warrior 2, which there's something great about that collective energy to help push yourself. But for a lot of people, it's even more radical to really tap into what you want to do. And the practice is not as fiery as it is in a studio, but it's so much more personal when you get to practice at home. And that I've really found to love that energy in an online setting and seeing everybody truly be able to take care of themselves get up and drink water without feeling like they're disrupting the class, or lay there if they want to, or I'll see people doing handstands against the wall when everybody else is in child's pose and they don't feel like they have to hold back their energy when everyone else is being told to rest. So I just really love that in an online space, you truly get to honor your energy and have a time and space to really tap into that. So I absolutely love teaching online. And I've invested now just a lot more of my energy building up my own online business and creating a space where people feel comfortable to practice. And it's been really wonderful. So it's very different than teaching in person. But also there's less overhead costs and I don't have to pay. Like it's much better pay to teach online because I get all that money versus, a studio drop-in is $32 and I get $4 of those $32, which is like most yoga students don't realize that the pay is so little to the teachers. And I get that it's expensive to run a studio and they need to do what they need to do to keep their doors open, but I make a lot more money as an online teacher, even though my practice is much smaller. So where I struggle with the online is figuring out authentic ways to meet new yoga students. So 90% of my students are people I've known in person. I'm slowly building up ways to meet new students online and figure out how to build a really authentic relationship with new students that I haven't met in person. So that I think is that's a slower burn for me, but it's happening and it's cool to meet new students. So
yeah. Oh my God. Thank you for taking us through that. And you started teaching online after you moved back to Detroit. You weren't teaching when you were still kind of like organizing and doing a lot of the work in the San Francisco area before, after.
I did teach some online when I lived in San Francisco at Ocean Beach Yoga. So the small community studio that I taught at in person, they created an online studio. They dismantled after a while. But I did get some practice online through that studio. Yeah.
Okay. So first you were kind of teaching online for other or the existing studios. And then eventually you started to decide to kind of teach your own online yoga classes.
Yep. Yeah.
How did that transition happen of like, wait, I could actually be teaching my own online. I don't have to be teaching for another studio.
Yeah. Well, I started teaching. So I had 2 classes at Ocean Beach that were already on the pre-existing schedule pre-pandemic that went online. And I realized pretty quickly it was easy to do on my own. So I just got my own Zoom account and added a couple more classes. So I was always teaching independently and through Ocean Beach Yoga. And then when Ocean Beach Yoga closed down, I just added those classes to my online schedule. So it was pretty seamless shift for me, if not a big learning curve, because I never have done anything online until the pandemic. But it, just like that one foot forward, it's like the studio burning down in San Francisco, you just kind of put one foot in front of the other. I am not a perfectionist, and that helps me so much because I didn't wait for things to be perfect. It was not perfect at first. So
I can totally relate. I am so far from perfectionist, and I just would rather do it imperfectly. I would rather do it when I'm still a beginner and, still awkward and, not really sure. But I would rather get it started. I feel like when my mind is on it, I just want to get it going. I just want to start it and I'll just learn as I go. It's kind of how I think. And there's a lot of mistakes along the way, a lot of, grammatical mistakes, or people tell me like, hey, you should edit this on your website, or, things like that I make a lot of little things. But I would, it doesn't bother me so much. I just it's better to get it going. So I'm on the same page with you. So when you decided to start teaching online for yourself and slowly transitioning to your own, how did you let your students know that you were teaching? Did you have a newsletter, existing newsletters? How did it happen for you to try to get them to join your online studio or online class?
Yeah. That's so I had my own email list that I had been collecting for many, many years. I never did anything with it for the first 8 years. I had an email list. Like I never sent a single email. I would just collect emails randomly when I remembered. So I did have a decent sized list when I chose to go online, which was helpful. And then, and like 20% of those emails bounced because I couldn't read their whatever. But then when Ocean Beach Yoga closed, the owner of that studio, who's a good friend of mine, gave me I got the list of everyone who's taken my class. So I was able during the closing of that to receive the emails of everyone who's taken my class. So that was a really great way to connect with students, was through the studio's email list.
Yeah, that's amazing that the owner did that. It's just really hard for me to imagine. Maybe with my experience of studio owners, I just feel like they would never give me the email address of their
Yeah. Ocean Beach Yoga was it was a gem of a yoga studio, and it was a true community. And the owner, who I absolutely adore, did such an amazing job creating a space where it felt like a community. And it didn't feel competitive, and it didn't feel like the owner wanted all of us to thrive and spread our wings, and she was there to support us thriving and spreading our wings. And as the teachers thrived and spread our wings, the studio grew.
Yeah.
So it was really an amazing studio to be a part of.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And that would be like the dream studio. And I wish all studios kind of had that mentality of like, we want teachers to thrive. That'll make our studio also thrive. If teachers find another amazing opportunity and have to part ways, we want to support that. And, I think this whole support and encouragement and the community is so necessary. And maybe I'm slightly jaded, but I don't see that so much. And, how studios would benefit so much if they really wanted the success of their teachers, even if that means teachers going somewhere else. Because if teachers leave the studio in a good foot, that teacher is going to always kind of continue to recommend that studio to whoever who lives in the area. Or maybe that teacher might come back and run a workshop or training at the studio again. And it's just like a win-win situation. And it's just sad that that's, in my small yoga world, I don't see that so much. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I totally believe that. It's so
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, it's the only studio I've ever seen do it. So I've taught at a lot of different studios in some way, shape, or form, and Ocean Beach was always the best in that way. So yeah, and it's confusing to me that more studios are not like that, because I think it's better for everybody when you're supportive of everybody. That just makes intuitive sense to me. But yeah, it's not been my experience all the time either, sadly.
So for your online classes, you started teaching online. Has it grown since you started your online virtual yoga online studio? How many classes a week are you currently teaching for your online classes? And what's your studio model in terms of, is it a membership? Is it drop-in? Tell us about your online studio.
Yeah. So I teach currently 5 live stream classes. Not all the classes do wonderfully. My weekend classes do great, and my lunchtime classes do great, and then I have early morning classes that just get a handful of people sometimes. But I keep it because it's easy, and I teach from home. So even if like only a few people show up, I'm like in my home and gonna do yoga anyway. So it feels very easy to maintain some public classes. I teach mostly private classes online, but I'll also host workshops and events through my online studio. And as far as like I offer any payment option you want. So I do memberships, and I have an on-demand library where you can get a membership just to take pre-recorded classes, or a membership to do pre-recorded and live stream classes. Or you can pay for a drop-in or get a 10-pack. Once I got over the hurdle of setting up the different payment structures, now it's very easy to maintain it. And I just feel like people need different things at different times. So it's easy for me to add an option and people can just pay however they want.
Yeah. And you said you also do quite a bit of private teaching online. So tell me maybe what's your balance of teaching schedule like now? How much of it is it online group classes versus private or any other streams of income?
Yeah. So I mostly teach one-on-one. I teach anywhere between 5 to 10 private classes a week. And I have a handful of long-term private clients. So that I do get new private clients now and then, but it's normally just like I have my long-term clients who they are like, I don't know how I got so lucky to have such amazing long-term clients, but I'm like, you are my angels, and they feel like family to me at this point. But I still check in every 6 months. I check in with them. I'm like, how's it going? Do you want to keep doing this? Like, I never want anyone to feel like they have to practice with me, but they just keep renewing. So that feels lucky. And then I have a handful of clients who just drop in. I have an online calendar where they can just schedule classes whenever they want to. So yeah, anywhere between 5 and 10 private classes a week, 5 public classes a week. And then I'll do online courses like the yoga and nervous system course that you got to take, which I'm doing again through Annie Carpenter's advanced smart flow training. We're actually doubling it to be a 16-hour course because there's just so much about the nervous system and yoga. It needs to be longer. So I'll
Yeah.
do courses and I'll do 2 to 3 retreats a year now.
Mm, I
All
love
that.
that. And a lot of your private, or even private and your group public classes that you teach online, were they students you knew you had in San Francisco in the previous time when you lived there, or are there also some students you had when you lived in Chicago? How did you find, what are the connections with these students?
Yeah. Mostly they were San Francisco clients that are still my clients. And then they've recommended me to to like their friends or family. So it's usually just been word of mouth.
Yeah. And was there any, not pushback, but like I'm assuming you probably were seeing them in person before the pandemic and switched to in private online. Was there certain people who's like, actually, I'm only interested in person, not interested in the online private?
It's actually been the opposite for me. So I had so some of my clients were online before the pandemic.
Oh,
So like I had a student move away and was like, I wanted to keep practicing with you. So we worked online, and we still work online together. So she's been an online client for 8 years. I see her every week for 8 years. Like it's wild. And then similar with, so I had in-person clients from San Francisco, and we went online, and now they're like, we want more online privates with you because it works so well for them. And then I've had some people who never thought about private classes, but with the stress of the pandemic, reached out and was like, I need extra support. Can we work together? So most clients have been post-pandemic just needing extra support.
mhm. So amazing to hear
Yeah.
that your online business, it seems like, it's thriving. A lot of people are wanting your service and you're able to support so many people from different, even another state across country. So that's so lovely to hear. Are you, if necessary, are you able to fully support yourself financially through your full-time yoga income?
Yeah. Yep. That's all I do. And it's my only stream of income, and it's been that way for a long time. So I feel very, very lucky that I can support myself with this passion project of mine.
Yes, I love to hear that. And you said you're doing even better since the pandemic because of switching to online.
Yeah. Yeah. And also moving to Michigan. Michigan's a lot more affordable. So that is very helpful. And I am a person, I try to live within my means. So I often see people, and I don't have any kids, so I'll mention that. Like I don't have any kids. That makes my life a lot more affordable, but I don't care too much about stuff. So I have an easier time living within my means than some people do. So Yeah.
Definitely. I can relate. I try to keep my living expenses low. And I choose not to have a car in LA. And for some people that's like impossible, or they can't get their head wrapped around that because it's such a driving city. But it's so like you can make your living expenses low. You can live quite simply and really prioritize what is important in your life that you want to spend your money on or in your time. Yeah, so definitely I always traveling is something I love that I want to be able to continue to do. And even if that means I don't have a car, or even if that means I don't have a fancy this thing or that thing. So definitely I think it's just kind of how we choose to live and what we prioritize.
Yeah. And I have two savings account for two trips that I'm saving up for. So I do think it's fun to save up for things that I really want. So,
Yeah. Well, tell us about your trips that you're saving up to.
well, I'm saving for a trip to Iceland with my sisters. So we're all in our 40s trip. So I'm the youngest. So when I turn 40, we're all going to take a sisters trip to Iceland. So
Wow.
I'm saving for that. And then I have a savings account for a trip for me and my partner. We really want to go to Alaska. So I have that. I'm like, that's going to be my gift to us for like some anniversary in the future. I don't know which one, however long it takes for me to save.
Yes, I love that. I
Yeah.
mean, they're both cold places, but beautiful
Yeah.
places.
I guess
Yeah.
that's true. They're both cold.
But depends. If you go in the summer, I'm sure it's not cold.
Yeah. And I can drink lots of unlimited hot chocolate.
Yeah. So now looking back at your yoga teaching journey, do you have any advice that you would give to a teacher who's starting out as a full-time yoga teacher, or who is thinking about becoming a teacher or full-time teacher? Or it could be advice that you wish somebody have shared with you earlier in your teaching career.
You know, this sounds so much more dismal than I want it to sound, but you have to really love it to do this. So I think there's perhaps a lot of glamorization of what it could be like to be a yoga teacher, and you have to really want to do this to do it. There's a lot of, for most yoga teachers, you're not going to make a ton of money. You're going to work really hard, and you're not going to see a lot of the benefits of your teaching. You have to really honor yourself and know that you're doing this because you love the practice and you want to share it. So get really grounded if this is something you really want to do. And if you say yes, then all the struggles that come with it will be manageable.
I love that. That's such a great, great advice, because it is true. It is glamorized, I think. People see it on maybe social media, what yoga teacher looks like, or their life appears to look like. And it can be beautiful and fun and amazing and purposeful, but also there's definitely challenge as well. We really have to work quite hard.
Yeah, we do.
What part of being a full-time yoga teacher do you love the most, and what do you find most challenging?
Um, there's just been so many unique challenges over the many years. Like you know, for a while, my challenge was to pay rent. For a while, my challenge was to remember why I love yoga. For a while, my challenge was to practice myself, because I lost my own practice for a while because I taught so much I didn't want to practice for myself. Now I feel pretty balanced with it all. I feel a lot less attached to what my practice looks like, and I just teach. I think being an online teacher, I can really just do what I want. And that's been really helpful for my career and my own personal personhood. So I guess my personal challenge now is to continue being creative. As far as like my new hurdle is, what is the online world? I'm so used to the in-person world of yoga. I'm still getting used to what it's like to meet new students, and what is it like to collaborate, which is why I loved getting asked to be on this podcast. I'm like, I want to collaborate more. I see this as a really great way in the online world to meet new students, and then my students can meet you. And I'm like, this, like, I want to collaborate so much more.
Mhm.
So I'm trying but I guess that's part of the struggle of like, how do I meet people in the online world? Because my whole existence has been in person. So I'm a baby online teacher.
Yeah, yeah. Where I think a lot of us are still learning as we go in this new online way, different ways to practice and share yoga. It's new. I mean, it's been around for a while, even before the pandemic, but it's become more popular more recently. So, and you mentioned it a little bit, but what does your yoga practice look like these days?
My practice looks like more of being slow. And so how I take care of my body is I do a lot more free flow movement, like rolling around on the floor, just doing organic movement. And I do strength training and resistance training because I am a small person and my joints ache. And I've learned over time that I need a lot more strength than I thought I did. So I do a lot of that stuff and taking walks and really enjoying walking and really intentionally enjoying small things in my life is a huge practice of mine, to let myself be in the experience of joy and the experience of pleasure and leisure versus just, I don't know, getting busy with the next thing. So that's my yoga practice these days.
I love that. I love that, being able to slow down and, appreciate the little beauty we see around us. When we're so busy, we're too busy to actually notice these little beauties that's surrounding us. So
Yeah.
I love what you shared. And I just have two last questions for you. What does success mean to you as a full-time yoga teacher?
I mean, I guess I want to say two parts to it that are equally important. And one is the more like logical, rational side where like to be a successful teacher, like you are actually teaching yoga and paying your bills, like I think that is pretty freaking awesome if you can do that. But then the other side of it is like, okay, so I could pay my bills, but if I'm not enjoying my life or if I'm not living the principles of yoga, am I really a successful yoga teacher? And I wouldn't be able to say yes, honestly. So having a lot of self-compassion towards myself and empathy towards others, like that is always the marker of a successful yoga teacher, living the principles of yoga.
Yeah, that how you said it reminded me of this story or quote, I guess I heard, where Krishnamacharya, one of the, some people call him the father of modern day yoga, his student asked him, "How do I know if my yoga is improving?" And Krishnamacharya answered, "Your yoga is improving, or yoga practice is improving not when your poses improves, but when your relationship starts to improve." And that's one of my favorite quote or a story, whatever it is, that I like to share with students, because it's so true. Like when you have a good relationship with yourself and people around you, your loved ones, your family, your friends, students, I feel like that is when we're actually practicing our yoga.
Yeah, 100%.
And last question, where do you see your yoga teaching going in the future? If you have any goals, or it doesn't have to be goals, but maybe a path that you want to take your teaching towards?
Yeah, well, I've been for the past 2 years training to become a somatic experiencing practitioner. And I have been weaving in a somatic lens to all things yoga. And I really love that combination. So I see that as a future path for me to continue to organically grow this, like a somatic awareness of yoga. Yoga is a somatic practice, but just incorporating specific nervous system techniques and language and education into it has been completely life-changing for me. So I really want to incorporate that more and more to my work, is teaching people about their nervous system, somatic awareness, and some trauma resolution. So a lot of the patterns that get stuck in our body, yoga can be a helpful tool, but to actually do trauma resolution with people, which once I'm done with this program, I can do that with people.
And when do you graduate?
So not and for another, I think I'll graduate in 2026. So I got a little more time. I'm learning the tools and I'm incorporating what I've learned now, but I won't have the title until I graduate from my advanced year. So that's not for a bit of time.
Yeah, I love that you're in that program. It seems like a pretty long program.
It's a 3-year program, but I applied too late for my advanced year, so I have to take a 9 months break before I got into the advanced year program. So
I see.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I know you already bring that kind of work in with the workshop I took from you, and it seems like the retreat that you lead with your friend seems like there's a lot of somatic that you bring in and nervous system work. So I love seeing all the work that you share into the world. So please tell the listener how they can find you if they want to reach out to you, they want to check out your online studio, or if you have anything coming up that you want to share with the listener.
Yeah. So if you love yoga and somatics, you will love my next retreat with Veronica of Waking Womb is going to be at Green Rock Retreat Center, which is an amazing off-grid sanctuary in just north of Bend, Oregon. So it's a high desert ecosystem. You will be completely held in nature, and you'll do yoga every morning and have somatic workshops and practices throughout the day, all in around ancient juniper trees and sage everywhere. And yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And each tent comes with running hot water and your own private outdoor shower. So it's really quite the perfect blend of comfort with gorgeous ecosystem. So I would say join for a retreat or take yoga in the comfort of your own home. I have so many classes for all types of things on my online studio. So you can take an online class with me in your living room or save up for a retreat.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your challenges as a yoga teacher, but also all the amazing offering that you have or things you have done in the past. I'm especially one of the huge inspiration. I mean, everything was inspiring, but one of the big thing that you inspired me was that retreat that you used to lead in San Francisco area where you donated all the profit to different grassroots organizations. And I just so inspiring to hear that. And I'm sure the listeners will be very inspired by, different nuggets of all the little things you share. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. And I really enjoyed chatting with you today.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation I had with Diana. I could relate to a lot of things she shared in this conversation. I also love that I got to interview another online yoga studio owner who's, doing everything on her own and thriving and having such an amazing community she is supporting on her online studio. What I was most inspired about was the retreat work and community work that she did in San Francisco. I have never heard of yoga teacher organizing and facilitating that many retreats for no profit. She was purely doing it to help and donate to different organization, grassroots causes, and that has been so inspiring for me. Leading a retreat has been on my mind for a couple of years. And like I said in this conversation I had with Diana, I really want to run my own retreat, but I really want the retreat to have a giving back aspect, the retreat to have cultural exchange where we learn about the culture, the people, and the land that we're visiting. And we come in with respect. And we're not only taking from the culture, country, land that we're visiting, but we're also giving back. I don't really see that many yoga retreats out there that has this in mind. And Diana, just huge respect for her for running retreat just to raise money and just for the cause that she believes in. And even when she was living in San Francisco and, as a yoga teacher living in an expensive city, we also don't make a lot of money as a yoga teacher. And still, she chose to donate. She chose to support the cause that she believed in. And I just have a huge respect for her. I hope you were inspired by her stories and her journey. And if this sparks any interest in you and maybe new ideas that came to you from this interview, just shoot me a message on Instagram, or you can write me a message through my website. I just love hearing from the listeners how you're enjoying the podcast, how you are enjoying the episode. If you have any requests for a topic to discuss, if you have a yoga teacher you want to recommend that I interview, or maybe you are a yoga teacher that I should interview, just message me, let me know, and we will make it happen. I hope you're having a great day so far, and I will be checking in with you next week from Peru. Have a good day.